Hello. I got my tea. I got my blue light glasses. I'm ready to roll, ready to talk about Animales. Kingdom Animale. All right, let me share my screen. Get there. Hopefully. Oops, unable to connect. Let's try again. Okay, so we are now doing the last slides of this section, and it's all about kingdom, the animal kingdom, Animala. And I will be, we'll be doing together kind of a phylogenetic tree for the animals. And this is something that you already have the handouts for. So you can do your notes right in, kind of in here, if that would be helpful, right? So this is chapter 32 and 34. And again, this is mostly so that you can see the relationships between animals and so that you can just kind of get exposure to all these different groups so that when you're, at the tide pool or at the zoo or whatever, you can tell your parents some cool stuff. All right. So the features of the kingdom Animale. I'm just going to call it the animal kingdom. Animals are all eukaryotic and multicellular, right? They are motile at some phase of their lives, right? We're going to see that some animals are not motile for most of their lives, but at some phase of their lives, they're motile, moving around. They are heterotrophs. They must eat their food, right? They're ingesters. There is no cell wall. Remember, plants have cellulose. Fungi have chitin. And some protists, in terms of diatoms, have a silica or a glass cell wall. But animals have no cell wall. Animals also have a blastula. And this is during development, when you have egg fertilized with sperm, and this kind of this duplicates into many cells, is that a blastula is a hollow ball of cells. So all animals have this blastula phase, right? So animals, there was really a Cambrian explosion about 530 million years ago, that we really had an explosion of animals kind of populating Earth, right? The rock layers show this explosion of animal diversity right around this time, and all animal ancestry can be traced back to this period of time. So there's two major groups of animals, with and without a spinal cord, right? So without spinal cord, we have the invertebrates, and with a spinal cord, we have the verts or the vertebrates. So in the invertebrates, we're going to talk about each of these. There's sponges, cnidarian, even though that's a silent C, cnidarians. So the sponges are the most simple. The cnidarians are kind of the jellyfish of the world, and the stinging cells. So like a sea anemone or a jellyfish. We have the flatworms. We're going to talk about planaria. We have nematodes, which are the roundworms. Mollusks, which are the bivalves. So these are like the clams, the mussels, those kinds of things. We have annelids, which are segmented worms. We have the arthropods, which are the creepy crawlers. So these are like the bugs, the insects, right? And we have the echinoderms, and those are like the sea urchins, all right? And then we're going to see that we have the vertebrates, and we have the tunicates, which look like almost a sponge, but they are an animal because they are motile at some part of their life. We have lancelets, which are one of the simplest kind of vertebrates. Lampreys with no jaws. Then we have lots of different fish. We have cartilaginous fish, like the sharks, bony fish, like most of the fish that we think of, and the lobe-finned fish. And the lobe-finned fish are interesting because they kind of have a transition point into the other vertebrates. And then we have amphibians, which are like the frogs, reptiles. like lizards, and then the mammals. All right, and we are going to spend in class time drawing these phylogenetic trees together. Okay, and I'll put these up, but I've also done videos of drawing these trees out as well. All right, animal development. So we talked about this blastula, and I want to point this out. So the zygote is the fertilized egg, right? And then once they go through lots of rounds of mitosis, which are these, sometimes called cleavage, you get these multiple cells. So here we have an 8-stage, and after multiple more rounds, we have what is called the blastula. All animals go through this blastula stage. This is a hollow ball of cells. So inside is called the blastocoel, right? C-O-E-L. We're going to come up with that term again. Blastocoel, which is the hollow ball of cells. During development, this blastula folds in on itself to create a gastrula. All right, and this is just all animal development have a blastula that forms into a gastrula. All right, and this gives rise to these different layers of cells, either an endoderm, mesoderm, or an ectoderm. All right, the endoderm, and you can see that here in green, the endoderm is going to form, the inner organs, right? Endo means inside. So that's the lining of all the organs. The mesoderm is the middle, and it's going to develop into the organs and the muscles. And then the ectoderm is what is going to form the outside, the exoskeleton, the skin, etc. So when we're talking about animal development, before we knew about DNA testing, researchers used morphology or looking at organisms and how they develop to try to categorize them. And they categorize them in these two different ways, which are kind of funny actually. So one, we have the protostome, and that means that the mouth is formed first. So remember, when blastulas form into a gastrula, you kind of have this opening, and it's whether that opening is going to become a mouth first or whether it's going to become an anus, right? So protostomes have the mouth first, and the gastrula is going to form the anus first. And the way I remember that is proto, like that's the beginning of our digestive system. Deuterostome, I remember that because doo-doo. Anus, doo-doo. Anus first. All right, so when you imagine, when we go here and we form that blastula, we're going to form this kind of opening. And eventually that opening can go all the way through. So if you think of humans, we literally have an open cavity from our mouth all the way down to our anus. It's kind of weird to think about, but it's an open tube, right? Yes, it kind of closes in on itself or whatever, but it's really an open tube out to the world, mouth, all the way through our bodies to the anus. Right. And so these body cavities are called coelums. All right. So kind of that word seal again, meaning this open hollow tube. So a coelom is a body cavity, and it's particularly lined with mesoderm. All right. So if we look at, let's start with humans here. We are called coelomates, right? And so we have this digestive cavity. But in our bodies, we also have an open cavity completely lined with mesoderm, right? And so humans have that, mollusks, the bivalves, the roundworms, or segmented worms, the creepy crawlers, the sea urchins, and all of the chordates, anybody with a backbone, right? And then we have these two other categories. You can have organisms that have no coelom at all. So these are no body cavity, right? So they have no body cavity. Yes, we still have that digestive cavity, mouth to anus, but there's no other cavity in it. These are called the acoelomates, so without a body cavity. And the only ones that have that are the flatworms. And then there's this middle group called the pseudocoeloms that have part of the cavity is mesoderm lined, but you can see the other part is actually right up next to the endoderm. right? So this yellow part. And these are the roundworms, the nematodes. All right, so as we look at animal classification, they're based on both morphological and developmental comparisons, like we just talked about, whether they have coeloms, how they form, whether the protostomes or deuterostomes with that gastrula, and molecular data. All right, so both types of classification, whether we're talking about morphological, developmental, or using molecular data, they agree that all animals share a common ancestor, right? So they're all going to have a LUCA. They both agree that sponges are the most simple of all of the animals. That most animals, not all, but most have bilateral symmetry. So if you take a human, you can kind of slice them in two and we're symmetric. And chordates, these guys with a bone, like a vertebrate bone backbone, bony vertebrae, are all deuterostomes. So that's us. So what does that mean? Anus first, right? Yep, Topher thought that was funny. Anytime you say deuterostomes, people laugh. All right, so these are the 9 animal phyla that you need to have notes on your kind of on your worksheet that I have posted or handed out. You need to know the phylum Porifera, which are the sponges, Cnidaria, which are the stinging cells, Platyhelminthes, which are the flatworms, Nematode, which are the roundworms, Mollusca, which are the bivalves, Annelida, which are the segmented worms, Echinoderms, which are the urchins, and then the chordates. Right? Notice that we have bilateral symmetry here. So almost all of the organisms are bilaterally symmetrical, except for the sponges and the Cnidaria. So now I'm just going to give you an overview of all of these guys. So the phylum Porifera, these are the sponges. So these are aquatic organisms. They have no symmetry, so they're completely asymmetrical. They also have no tissues. They're covered in these pores. So if you take a little zoom in, they're covered in these pores. They do have a swimming larva. All right, so that is the kind of, they do have a swimming larva, but then they are sessile or non-motile for the rest of their lives. And these again are the sponges. Simplest animal. All right, then we go into the phylum Cnidaria. These are the only organisms that are radially symmetrical. So if you look down on a sea anemone, you can kind of cut it in any way, a piece of the pie, and they're symmetrical. Same with jellyfish. They have tentacles with stinging cells. So these Cnidaria have nematocysts, right? These are stinging cells. And you can see that if you ever go to a tide pool and you kind of touch these sea anemones, they feel a little sticky. That's because they're trying to sting you with their nematocysts, but our skin is too thick for us to really feel. These include the jellyfish, the sea anemones, corals, and hydra, which is shown here. As we go up, we have the worms, all right? It's kind of annoying. We have lots of different kinds of worms, but for early on in Earth, there weren't a lot of organisms around, not a lot of animals, and worms kind of ruled the Earth for a certain amount of time. So these are, the first one is the phylum Platyhelminthes, and these are the flatworms. I always remember that flatty platies. They are acoelomates, so no body cavity, right? Still have a digestive system, but no body cavity. They are hermaphroditic, both male and female characteristics. Many of them are parasitic. And 2 examples here are planaria, which is shown here, which kind of has this cartoonish look, and tapeworms, which are a parasite. Right? Planaria is really cool because you can cut it up in many pieces and each piece will grow a new worm. So they're involved in a lot of biological research looking at regeneration. The next group are the phylum Nematoda. These are the roundworms. They have a pseudocoelom, so they still have a body cavity, but it's not completely lined with mesoderm. They live everywhere. 2 big examples. Some are parasitic, as you can see here in this dog eye. Zoom in, sorry, really gross, but you can see a worm here and a worm here. Ew. Actually might be a cow. Anyway, and then another one are C. elegans, which is a roundworm that's really involved in research. And this is where we discovered, for example, apoptosis, that process of self-killing. The next group are the annelids. These are the segmented worms. So the best example here is an earthworm, but leeches and tube worms in the ocean, in marine environments, are both examples. These are coelomates. So these are more similar to humans because they have a body cavity completely lined in mesoderm. They have a complex nervous system. Now we get into the phylum Mollusca. So these are bilaterally symmetrical. So these are the first organisms where we see that bilateral symmetry. They have a muscular foot, such as this snail, a limpet, etc. They have a soft body. They have a shell that's secreted from a mantle. So here we can, in this limpet, we have a shell, a shell, a shell. Sorry, that's not a limpet, that's a chitin, sorry. And even octopus and squid are in this category because they have that sharp beak, which is kind of the shell. The phylum Arthropoda, these are the creepy crawlers. These are the ones that have an exoskeleton made of chitin, right? That's what makes it crunch when you kill a spider or when you eat a cockroach, as some of you may have done. They have jointed appendages. Segmented body, these can be both terrestrial or aquatic. So these are spiders, insects, crabs, shrimp, barnacles. And just to point out the barnacle here, largest or longest, shall I say, penis to body size ratio in the animal kingdom. Whoa, they have a penis, they just dip into all the other barnacles nearby. Okay, phylum Echinodermata. These have the spines, and I always remember echino just sounds pokey to me, right? So the spines, they have spines, spicules, and plates. They have good regeneration, so you can cut off a starfish foot, for example, and it'll grow another one. They have a hydrostatic skeleton. So the way they have their body is really because of the water they pump in. They have tube feet, which are shown here. What are these called? Urchins, even these urchins have spine feet and they can walk. So these include the urchins, things like sand dollars, sea stars, and sea cucumbers. Now we get into the one that we're going to spend the most time on. This is the phylum Chordata. So these include the vertebrae, or the vertebrates, right? The characteristics, here are the characteristics, and some are only present during development. But one, they have all chordates or vertebrates have a notochord, right? Shown here. So they have a nerve cord, but also they have kind of a vertebrate to protect that. They have dorsal nerve cord. So we have kind of a spinal cord and something to protect it. They have pharyngeal slits, right? So these are shown here. This is a very rudimentary kind of breathing system, and they have a post-anal tail, right? And you're thinking, wait a minute, humans don't have a post-anal tail, but we do during development, right? We also have these pharyngeal pouches during development in our embryo, right? So the very earliest chordates are the tunicates. These are sea squirts. They look like sponges, but they are not sponges, all right? They are a vertebrate, and that is because they have a larva that is motile and has a dorsal nerve cord. So the larva have all of the chordate features, but the adult looks very, very simple, right? The next group are the lancelets. These resemble a very small fish, but they have no jaws, no obvious head, and very few sensory organs, right? They do in fact have a notochord and a nerve cord and these pharyngeal slits, but they're very, very simple organisms. Then we're going to get into the fish. So in the invertebrates, we had lots of worms. In the chordates, we have lots of fish. And again, there was a time on Earth where most of the animals on the planet were these very kind of these simpler organisms before organisms adapted to become terrestrial, right? So first off, we have the jawless fish, right? So here are the jawless fish. The big example are the hagfish and the lampreys. These have no jaws, cartilaginous skeleton. Then we go into the cartilaginous, right? The fish that have cartilage. So these have a cartilage skeleton. The bodies have become more streamlined. These are the sharks and the rays and the skates. Then we go into the bony fish, right? And these have scales and bony skeleton. They have more diverse body plan. They have a swim bladder. And these are the eels, the tuna, the rockfish, most of the fish that we think about when we eat fish or when we have fish. And then finally, we go to the lobe-finned fish. And this is really a transition. People think that this is one of those transitional organisms going from water to land. So they have fins, but those fins have many bones and muscles. So they use those fins similar to kind of walking, all right? These are close to amphibians, and the example is the lungfish. Finally, then we are going to terrestrial land. So these are the amphibians. So these guys can be aquatic and terrestrial. They're cold-blooded, so that doesn't mean they're cold. It means that they are the same temperature as their environment. External fertilization, right? So here we have these soft-shelled eggs. They're released as this gelatinous clump. Then the fertilization occurs externally. They have moist skin, and these eggs need moisture, right? So they have very close ties to aquatic environments. As organisms adapted for more terrestrial life, they gained dry, scaly skin to help protect water loss. They gained internal fertilization as a way that they don't have to be close to water now. They can actually do that they can do that fertilization internally, similar to what we do. They have a 4-chambered heart. And finally, we get these eggs that are more adapted to terrestrial life. They have a shelled amniotic egg. Then we get into the reptiles. And I want to point out that birds are part of the reptile category. And this is kind of funny. But if you look at a bird's, for example, feet, they're scaly and they kind of look reptilian. It's a little weird. So they're warm-blooded for the first time. So they have kind of an internal homeostasis, right? They can regulate internal temperatures. Most can fly, but not all, obviously. Feathers. Many have beaks and scaly legs, and lightweight bones. All right. So these reptiles include, the birds. But the birds have obviously had different adaptations to fly. Here, this guy is the oldest known bird that was, the remains have been found. It's an Archaeopteryx, and it had a toothed beak, winged claws, etc. All right, then we get to the mammals. We are warm-blooded. We have mammary glands. We have hair or fur, large brains, and live birth, except for a few. And I like to point out those exceptions. So here are the exceptions to the live birth. We have monotremes, which lay eggs, right? So that would be such as the platypus. We have marsupials that have pouches. That would be obviously like the kangaroo. And then we have the other ones, which are have the live births, which are the placentals, right? And that's like us. We have a uterus and a placenta. So the two exceptions are the monotremes and the marsupials. So I want you guys to think about, as organisms adapted, as they had random mutations that allowed them to kind of be more adapted to terrestrial life, what stresses did animals face as a result, right? It has to do with fertilization and eggs, etc. What adaptations were necessary for animals to evolve into terrestrial living? So I want you guys to be thinking about that. All right, I will stop there. All right, Bye, animals.